Chapter 5, War and Legacy, from Marathon to the Fall of Xerxes. The wind howled across the Aegean. From the shores of Asia to the plains of Greece, banners fluttered bearing the golden symbol of Ahura Mazda, and the sound of marching feet echoed like thunder. The Persian Empire, vast, disciplined, divine, was about to meet its greatest test. The age of conquest had ended. Now began the age of reckoning. The dream of Darius to rule the known world. For Darius the Great, the world was a sacred order, an empire of truth and balance ordained by Ahura Mazda. But across the sea, in the small, rocky lands of Greece, there were men who did not bow. They called themselves free, and they had dared to defy the King of Kings. When the Greek cities of Ionia rose in rebellion, burning Sardis, the jewel of Persia's western provinces, it was not merely an act of defiance. To Darius, it was an insult to divine order. He swore vengeance. According to legend, each night at dinner, a servant would whisper in his ear, "Master, remember the Athenians." And so began one of history's most legendary rivalries, Persia versus Greece, empire versus freedom, discipline versus defiance. The invasion of Greece, the Marathon campaign. In 490 BCE, Darius launched his retaliation. A vast fleet, hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of men sailed across the Aegean. Persian cavalry, archers, and infantry landed on the plains of Marathon, a mere day's march from Athens. The Persians expected victory. Their empire had swallowed Babylon, Egypt, and India. What were these scattered city-states to the King of Kings? But the Greeks, led by Miltiades, met them head-on. Under a blazing sun, on that dry plain surrounded by sea and marsh, the two worlds collided. Persian arrows darkened the sky, yet the Greeks charged, heavy bronze shields clashing, their phalanx cutting through the lighter Persian ranks. When the dust cleared, the impossible had happened. The Persian army retreated, and the legend of Marathon was born. A single runner, breathless and bloodied, carried the message to Athens, "Nenike kamen," meaning "we have won," before collapsing in death. The word marathon would echo through centuries, a symbol of endurance against overwhelming odds. The rise of Xerxes, the heir of a dream. When Darius died, his son Xerxes I inherited not just the empire but his father's unfinished war. He was young, ambitious, and burning with the same divine purpose to bring the West into the fold of Ahura Mazda. For years he prepared. In Susa and Persepolis, engineers, soldiers, and architects worked tirelessly. Bridges were built, canals were cut, and stores of grain were laid along the route. At the Hellespont, Persian engineers performed the impossible. They chained together hundreds of ships to form two colossal floating bridges linking Asia and Europe. Across them marched the greatest army the ancient world had ever seen, men from 40 nations, from Egypt to Bactria, from India to Thrace. The ground trembled as the empire moved. Xerxes watched from a gilded throne, the wind in his hair, and declared, "Now the land and the sea are one beneath the power of Persia." The Battle of Thermopylae, the fire at the gate. In 480 BCE, the Persian tide reached Thermopylae, the hot gates, a narrow pass between mountains and sea. There, King Leonidas of Sparta and his 300 warriors stood waiting. What followed was legend. For 3 days, the Spartans and their allies held the mountain pass, cutting down wave after wave of Persian soldiers. Even when flanked and surrounded, Leonidas refused to yield. When the last Spartan fell, Xerxes ordered their bodies buried under stones, but he knew what their defiance meant. Thermopylae became more than a battle. It was a message, written in blood and fire. Freedom can burn brighter than empire. Athens in flames and the Battle of Salamis. After Thermopylae, Xerxes swept through Greece unopposed. Athens was abandoned and then burned. Temples turned to ash, the Acropolis glowing red against the night. But the Greeks were not finished. Their fleet, under Themistocles, lured the Persian navy into the narrow straits of Salamis. There, the Persian advantage turned to chaos, their numbers too great for the tight waters. Greek triremes struck fast and hard, ramming and boarding the massive Persian ships. Xerxes watched the destruction from his throne on a hillside, his dream collapsing in smoke and splintered wood. The god of the sea had taken his toll, and the Persian fleet broke. Retreat and reflection. The waning of the eagle. Defeated at sea and bled on land, Xerxes retreated. He left his general Mardonius to finish the campaign, but at Plataea, Persian hopes finally died. The great king returned to Persepolis, his once divine confidence shadowed by doubt. The empire still stood, vast, rich, unbroken, but something had changed. The aura of invincibility was gone. Xerxes turned inward, devoting his years to architecture, art, and ceremony, building the grand hall of 100 columns at Persepolis, the largest throne room ever constructed. But in the halls of victory, silence lingered. Even the courtiers could feel it. The empire had reached its zenith.
Legacy of an empire. The wars between Persia and Greece did not end the Achaemenid dynasty, but they changed the course of history. The East and West had met in fire and steel, and both were transformed. Persia remained the greatest empire of its age, tolerant, organized, and magnificent. But Greece would rise to challenge it again, centuries later, under Alexander the Great. Yet even Alexander would admire what Persia had built: the roads, the language, the governance, and the dream of unity. For though Xerxes fell short of his father's vision, the Persian Empire endured for another 150 years, still shining, still vast, still proud. Its legacy lived not in conquest, but in connection, the belief that an empire could bind the world with more than fear. It could bind it with order, vision, and faith. And so the curtain fell on the wars of Darius and Xerxes, not with destruction, but with endurance. For empires may fall, but the ideas that built them echo through eternity.